So how do we break bad news to parents? Well, how would you want bad news to be broken to you? You got to think about everybody involved are humans, all right? But you got to be honest. As a teacher, and my advice to young teachers is always be honest. But you got to have a little empathy, all right? So if you're a parent, I want to hear the truth, but sometimes you kind of have to, kill them with kindness and then give them the truth if it's bad news. Definitely, always, if it's good news, lead with that. Oh my goodness, Johnny passed the test again. It's amazing, and then go with it, right? If it's bad news, you want to start off by saying, Johnny, I enjoy having Johnny in class. Johnny gets along pretty well with his, classmates. Johnny didn't do very well on this test. Or Johnny has a hard time staying focused and we need to figure out how we can help him be focused. Something like that, to where you start off just completely disarming the parent. Because what does Mama Bear do best? Defend her kid. And don't put her in a position where she has to defend her kid, because you will lose every time. All right? You and Mama Bear and Daddy Bear are on the same team. They just need to know the bad news. So start off with a compliment of some sort. You can give a compliment to any kid, even if they're treating you terribly. You can still say, hey, they are in class every day or every other day or whenever you see them. Or they generally stay on task. Or, sometimes they are, they're kind of loud, but it's kind of funny. And sometimes he's a funny guy or whatever. Come up with something that at least disarms the parent. Because if you were a parent, I know a lot of you are not yet, but sometimes you will. You want to hear the good news first. And then you always want to give the truth, but then also offer a solution. So, Johnny really didn't do a very good job on the test. And I think it was probably because he didn't study very well the night before. So let's see if we can try to change things better. How is he studying? Is there a quiet place for Johnny to study at your house? Something, so the criticism isn't criticism as in like putting people on the defense. It's we have a problem, let's solve it together. And parents love that. They want to be part of the solution. And if the kid's there, the kid is like, oh my gosh, I know I was a total jerk to you. Don't tell my mom or dad, Well, you don't have to go to the extreme and say, yeah, Johnny threw an eraser in class. Maybe he did. I don't know, but, you don't have to tell every detail. You just say, Johnny was kind of acting up that day or whatever. How are we going to solve this problem? Maybe he didn't have breakfast or whatever, but that can't go on anymore. Something like that. Always have a solution. That'll get you a long ways. I had this situation one time, and it was my first year teaching, maybe my second year teaching, but it was early in my career. And I had a parent who's an attorney. I didn't know he was an attorney. He calls me up. Class gets over at like 3:30. At 3:35, my classroom phone rings, and it's this guy screaming at me about how I put his daughter in a bad position. And you know what? I didn't get defensive. And I learned this because I was like at a crossroads. I could have started yelling back at him and, whatever, because he came at me hard. And here's what I did. I listened. He's threatening me. I'm going to take you. I'm going to ruin your career. I'm going to sue you. And you know what? I said, I listened. I said, when he's done, I let him vent. And then when he was done, I said, you know what? I never looked at it that way, and I'm very sorry. It disarmed the whole situation. You know what he said? Thank you for apologizing. Have a great day. And I never heard from him again. And then because sometimes you do things and say things that there are unintended consequences. You didn't intend for this to go down that route. And that's the road it went down in class that day. I didn't even think about it that way. I don't remember exactly the situation, but I never really thought that I put her in a bad position in front of the class. We were doing a debate thing and I can't remember. And I questioned her about something. And I realized, I probably did come off not so in a good way. And I probably did put her in that situation because you can't control how people respond to you. You got to be careful with that. And going back to empathy, have empathy for people. Now, if they're being unreasonable, if a parent's swearing and, threatening to hurt you or hurt your family, that's something you don't have to deal with. You can say, hey, listen, I appreciate you're upset. I'm not going to speak to you that way. You're not going to speak to me that way. Let's make an appointment sometime in the future and we can talk about this. But we're not going to do that right now. You're obviously upset. If you control the veracity of the response as a teacher, okay? And if you ratchet it up, and I've seen that. I've seen teachers, starts yelling and they're yelling back and forth. And it's like, where's that going to get anybody? And you have the right to express yourself. It's not like you have to be soft and roll over every time. But the key is, if the parent took the time to pick up the phone and dial your digits, they obviously care. One way or the other, they care. And you need to have some empathy because they care. All right? Because they love their daughter or their son. You just think they're cool and like them. They love them. You know what I mean? So anyway, try to deflate the situation. Try, if you can, take emotion out of it, but don't be stone cold, because I've seen teachers that are like, I'm a robot, I don't care, we go by the rules, and the rules are this, and your kid sucks, and they don't. I'm just teasing. They don't do that. But I'm just saying, they're robotic in their answers. You got to have some empathy and realize, you know what? You might have messed up. You never looked at it that way. You didn't do it intentionally, but you might have messed up. And if you did, don't get defensive, because that's only going to throw fuel on the fire. All right? Admit you did wrong and say, you know what? It's simple. I didn't see it that way, and I'm sorry. I understand where you're coming from. I feel your tension, and I'm sorry. Because you really want to get defensive back at them and respond. That's just a never-ending situation. And as a teacher, you're going to lose that situation. Because then, going back to my story, that kid who was 18, by the way, I call him kid, they're an adult. They came back to my class. And I said, listen, I didn't mean to put you in that position. I didn't see it that way when we did this thing. But I understand where you're coming from. And I heard from your dad. And I sincerely apologize for putting you in that position. And from that point forward, there was no animosity. There was no going home and bad-mouthing me to dad. We were on the same page. You have to be on the same page with the parent and the child or teen. If you're not, there's a disconnect. And that, by the way, that doesn't mean that that's forever that way. You can repair that relationship. All right? Thanks for watching. Please share this with anybody that's dealt with a teacher or that is a teacher that wants to be a teacher, that's a young, inexperienced teacher. They can learn a lot, I hope. Anyway, JRod loves you. Thank you.